Before we dive in, I want to share something with you. If you've ever found yourself in the middle of a panic attack thinking, I don't know what to do, I don't know what to say to myself right now, I created a free guide called Panic Attacks: What to Say to Your Brain When You're Spiraling. Because in these moments, it's not about trying to force yourself to calm down or think positive. It's about having supportive words that actually meet your brain where it is so you can stop the spiral from escalating. Inside, I walk you through simple, grounded phrases you can say to yourself when your mind is telling you you're not safe, something is wrong, or you're losing all control. It's free and you can grab it in the show notes. I'm Shannon Ireland, your host of a Healthy Push podcast. I struggled with anxiety, panic disorder, and agoraphobia for 15 years. Everything used to be hard for me. Even just driving 5 minutes from my house used to feel impossible. But now I absolutely live for travel and adventure, and I experience lots of peace and joy. I've not only reclaimed my life, but I've helped hundreds of others to do the same. Here, we stop managing anxiety and instead we create a healthy relationship with it. One where you say goodbye to the anxious thoughts, symptoms, panic attacks, and fears, and you actually live your life. Forget complicated strategies, quick fixes, or the same old hacks you've heard 100 times before. Each week, I'll bring you simple, actionable advice and honest conversations that lead to real, long-term healing. You aren't just an anxious person, my friend. There are reasons why you're struggling with anxiety, and these are things you can fix and heal from. And this is where that journey begins. Welcome. You're right where you're meant to be. Hello, and welcome back to a Healthy Push podcast. Today's episode is such an important one because we're going to talk about something that so many people think about, wonder, probably spend a lot of time analyzing, and it's why do I struggle with anxiety the way that I do? So, if you've ever felt like your anxiety is confusing, frustrating, and it feels like it has maybe come out of nowhere, this conversation is going to help you to make so much more sense of it. So, today I'm joined by Debbie Missud. She's a therapist who specializes in anxiety and trauma. And together, we're going to dive into factors that can contribute to anxiety. And I have to say, this episode is not about labeling you or putting you in a box. It's really about just helping you to better understand yourself with lots more compassion, less self blame. Because when you understand why anxiety shows up the way it does for you, it really makes the journey a lot easier to respond in a way that's helpful. So, Debbie, welcome to Healthy Fresh Podcast.
Hi, Shannon. I'm so happy to be here.
Yeah, this is so exciting. I always scroll through people's Instagrams, of course, before we hop on, and I'm like, what are we going to talk about? And I saw that you did a reel, and I was like, oh no, this is what we need to talk about because this is going to be so helpful for people. So let's just start. Can you describe like what we mean when we say factors that contribute to anxiety?
The factors that contribute to anxiety are on different levels. We typically look at all of the factors on what we call a biopsychosocial level. So, what are the biological contributors to your anxiety? What's going on internally? What's going on neurochemically? What are the genetic predispositions that are contributing to your own sensitivity to your environment? Psycho. So, obviously, what is going on psychologically? What are the thoughts that are contributing to the anxiety? What are the behaviors? What are your views about the world, about others, about yourself that are fueling your anxiety? And then social, what is happening in your environment that is contributing to your anxiety?
So much, right? I'm like, I always pick these things and I'm like, this is such a great topic, but it's so, so big. So we're going to try to narrow it down and talk about like a few big contributors, but they're obviously not the only ones. But I thought these three that you talked about in this video, I'm like, oh my gosh, people are really going to like put some connections together. So the first one that you said is nervous system sensitivity. So I'd love for you to talk about this. What does this mean?
Yeah, so nervous system sensitivity is how your body is receiving input from your environment. And there are some people who are just biologically wired with a little bit more sensitivity to what's going on in their environment than others. So, something that might be moderately activating for one person is going to be highly activating for another person. It's going to immediately activate your fight or flight response, or maybe even your shutdown, like burnout response, right? And so, that's what we're talking about when we say nervous system sensitivity. It's that your body and your mind are taking in what might be a what we call neutral stimulus and then having a strong reaction. That's kind of like the high level overview.
Yeah, well, we're gonna dig in a little bit because I think this is true for so many people and is something that people like maybe recognize, but I think we can often do this thing with this one where we're kind of like just categorizing ourselves as being genetically predisposed and kind of like screwed, if I like can just say it.
Yeah.
I think we just think this is just who I am and like I'm always going to be super sensitive and then experiencing anxiety and panic all the time. But like, is that the case when we're talking about this one?
No, definitely not. So you may have some nervous system sensitivity that is going to activate your fight or flight response pretty quickly. But what you just said there, the thoughts that perpetuate it of things like I'm screwed, I'm always going to feel this way, I'm always going to have this panic, you almost then reinforce your anxious response and then that can be what makes it worse. So a lot of people do have this baseline your nervous system is just kind of a little bit more sensitive than maybe somebody else's, and they'll shame themselves for it, or they'll be incredibly critical towards themselves for it, and so they'll have an anxious response, and then they villainize their anxious response, and then that starts this avalanche of feeling 10 times worse. So, no one's going to ever be able to fully get rid of their anxiety, whether you have a more sensitive nervous system or not. But instead, we want to work on changing your relationship to your anxious responses rather than eliminating the anxiety altogether. I talk about this with clients a lot. That's unfortunately not a realistic goal.
Oh, yeah. Well, I think, of course, we're all human and we're like, can we just get rid of it? Like, it's not a fun experience. But
Yeah,
I think you can definitely sort of turn the dial down in learning how you can like better work with yourself and better work with your emotions. Yeah. But do you think, I love how you said you really do villainize that response that you have because it is, I think, really frustrating, obviously, as a human to like be more sensitive and you're walking around and you're probably perceiving others to be like totally fine, not ever phased by anything. And you're like, why do I have such a hard time? Like, why am I always like more anxious than other people? And I think that is where we can often do that, like beating ourselves up. Why am I like this? Because I think it can be frustrating, right?
absolutely. And I will say the comparison to other people doesn't always help. It's another one of those ways in which we exacerbate it by telling ourselves there's something wrong with me. It's going to make us feel 10 times worse.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. So, is there something where you say, because I think anyone with anxiety is it, like probably picked up on this. I am such a sensitive person. And so, of course, I picked up on it. When you say it's sort of how you're biologically wired, I think we tend to think when we hear something like that, again, right, like this is just who I am. But I think, like what you were saying, we have that self criticism, we have beliefs like intertwined in all of them. So there is obviously work we can do with this, right? To make it so that our system is not always registering everything as dangerous.
Exactly. There are things that we can do both psychologically and in our environment that can help to reduce the exacerbation of the anxious response. Your mind and your body are interconnected. So, one of the first things that I try to strip down with my clients is how are you taking care of yourself holistically? How is your sleep? How are you doing with just taking care of yourself when you're sick? Are you eating 3 meals a day? How is your eating? Are you avoiding any drugs, substances, things that are going to inherently screw with your brain chemistry, right? So we really want to strip it back down to let's begin with how you are taking care of your body because that will inherently influence your nervous system sensitivity. Then we do move up to the psychological elements of it. What are the belief systems about yourself, the world, and others that are exacerbating, again, this baseline response? And then we, of course, do want to look a little bit more societally and see what are these external things in the environment that might not be really in your control that are, of course, activating that anxious response. Then what can we do to practice into stress tolerance here so that your nervous system doesn't feel like it's screaming all the time? So while that, again, initial reaction might not really be in your control, what you do from there on out fully is. And there are some things that we can do to reduce the intensity of that initial reaction, which is things just kind of like baseline taking care of yourself.
Ugh, I love that, and I know that we often hate to hear that because it's like, "Oh, come on." Like, I am stage 5 panicking, right? My system's, like, always on high alert, and you're telling me just, like, to better take care of myself, but I think this was one of the hardest lessons I learned in my recovery, and I look back and I'm like, "Oh my god." Like, you were barely eating, like, barely you were isolating, had no connection, like, all of these things that are just, like, kind of common sense when you're in it and you're so deeply struggling, it feels like, no, like, those things aren't really gonna be helpful. So, I'm so glad that you said that taking care of yourself is really important.
That's not to say that when you're having a panic attack that the solution is to sleep and eat well
Right.
and exercise. No, that is not at all what I'm saying. When you are having extreme panic, that is when you really want to implement distress tolerance skills to really bring down that panic response. However, when you are not in a state of panic and you're really just looking more broadly at how to manage your anxiety as a whole and you're trying to bring down the emotional activation and that sensitivity, you do want to take a look at how you're taking care of yourself. And it's annoying, you're right, because it feels so simple, but the amount of people who are like, I don't need that. Like, I don't need to connect with other people. I don't need my 7 hours to 8 hours of sleep. Like, I can just live off of 4." And they're like, "Why am I so anxious all the time?" And it's like, I had 7 coffees, I am barely getting any sleep, and I haven't eaten a balanced meal in 6 days.
Yeah.
And it's like, "Okay, let's see what happens when we do first start." It's just the starting point. I wanna emphasize that. It's just the starting point. It's not the end all be all answer. Because for some people, that can feel a little invalidating, and that's not the goal.
So true, but I'm so glad you mentioned that mind and body connection because I think we often don't really realize how much our mind and bodies are connected, and so if you're not taking care of yourself, in those basic physical ways, it really does affect your mind, and I think that's what I can so clearly see now, and waking up in the morning and, like, maybe skipping breakfast on a daily basis and not eating until, like, 11 o'clock, and I was eating a granola bar, and before that was just, like, coffee, 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 and so it's like, you can see it now when you're kind of outside of it, but in those moments, like, it's so helpful to slow down and be like, I gotta take care of myself," right? And I'm so glad you said, like, that's not just gonna, like, erase the panic and make it so that you stop having panic attacks, because that, yes, can be incredibly invalidating. Let's shift a little and talk about another big contributor, and this one I feel like, of course, is a big, big one. And it's those early experiences that we have in
Yes.
life. So can we talk about that and how that can contribute to anxiety?
Yes. So, aside from the biological sensitivity, a lot of anxiety is learned and reinforced. And it's reinforced often through experiences that, I mean, in my experience, we're with our clients able to trace this back to childhood experiences where the environment maybe felt a little chaotic or it felt unsafe or it made you feel ashamed about yourself, and you learned to cope with the stress of your environment by staying hypervigilant, by bracing for the other shoe to drop, by preparing for the worst case scenario, by catastrophizing, and by turning it on yourself, by wanting to regain that sense of control. So then you put it back on yourself. And each time that you do prepare for that worst case scenario while you're still in that environment, you reinforce that my hypervigilance was good. My anxiety kept me safe. That catastrophe did happen, so thank goodness I racked my brain trying to think of every possible scenario.
Ugh, this one's such a big one, right? Because those early experiences can shape so many of the patterns that we develop. And I think these are some of the things, right? That like being hyper vigilant, like constantly thinking you can outthink your way out of having the emotions and like all of that. It resonates so much. When you say putting it on you, what do you mean by that?
So, a lot of people who grew up in these chaotic, unstable, maybe even outright harmful environments, especially as children, cannot escape the environment. You cannot, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but you can't get a job at 11 years old and
Right.
sign a lease and support yourself. So you are stuck in the environment that you grow up in. And when we don't have control over the environment, we start to put it on ourselves. There's a saying that I really love that goes, "We'd prefer to believe that we are sinners in a world ruled by God than to live in a world ruled by the devil." Like completely secular, like secularly, more so meaning that we would rather believe that we are the ones at fault than to admit that the people who we are dependent on are causing harm to us. So then, one of the ways in which we put it back on ourselves is again to believe that we're the bad ones. And then there's another element of it if it doesn't turn into more of that shame and blame where we put it back on ourselves by trying to regain control over the things that we don't actually have control over. So we seek control in these other areas of our lives, and that can be by ruminating about every possible worst case scenario, by being hypervigilant, by bracing for impact. Again, just trying to regain control over the uncontrollable.
Yeah. Ugh. Okay. Totally makes sense. My brain was like going in that direction, but also like then that stuff, right, can lead to hyper independence, which is like another whole hard, challenging thing that you can find yourself like operating in this place. And so much of this really does come from that lack of control, right? And of course, like you're saying, it makes perfect sense as a kid. It's like you don't have that control. And so you're like, I'm going to work in any way to get it, and this is, like, another one that I can see so clearly now. I'm like, of course you had so much anxiety and were trying to control everything." And then the real shit part, right, is you start feeling so much anxiety and you start having so much panic, and then that feels really out of control and is so incredibly triggering. It's like, "No, system not protecting me, like, my system's trying to attack me," even though that's obviously not the case.
Yeah. And in those initial cases, the anxiety is coming up protectively. It is coming up to try to prepare you for that worst case scenario because you were living in the worst case scenario. So that also reinforces the anxiety of being like, okay, I was right. I was right. So let me keep behaving in this way. Let me keep having these thoughts. Let me keep ruminating. Let me keep doing these things. Um, and then when you're no longer in that environment, but your brain has learned to do that, that's when it can start feeling really debilitating and where you're like, my anxiety is out to get me. This is the most uncomfortable sensation. Why is this happening? An email from my boss is not the same as getting reprimanded the way that I was as a child, but why does my nervous system feel like it is? And it's because you are operating from this place of what we call your implicit memory that is more functioning automatically and for survival rather than really grounding you in what's happening in the present.
Yep. I know so many people are like, "Yes, yes." Okay, my brain now is going to this place. So I think, of course, those early childhood experiences, I think we have to talk about this a little bit. There can be some real obvious signs, right? That like you had some trauma in your childhood that really impacted you. There can be a lot of that big T trauma, but there can also be little T trauma. And I think so many people, right, don't really recognize, oh, I did experience some trauma. Like there were some unmet needs or some things that aren't so obvious. So maybe can you speak a little bit about that? Because I think some people are like, well, my home was felt safe. Like it wasn't chaotic. My parents weren't screaming, yelling at each other. Like we had money. Like I had all my basic needs taken care of, but there's other things, right?
hitting something that I talk about a lot, and it's the difference between wants and needs. And a lot of the times, so something that we'll identify as this, again, little t trauma is when you do not get emotional attunement, but because you had money or your family was able to provide that support and give you the things that you wanted, you learned that that was, I guess, what you were supposed to, that was all you needed. When in reality, what you actually needed was emotional attunement. And so you don't need to have grown up in a what we would normalize, or sorry, normally talk about as a standard chaotic household. It can be anything from, you maybe had a parent who was maybe a little emotionally immature in that their moods were a little bit more volatile, but it doesn't mean that it had to be explosive in your household. It could be anything from, you were parentified, meaning that your parents expected you to take on early adult roles. It could be anything from pressure being put on you to perform and having your worth tied to your achievement. So you learn that you are only as worthy as the things that you accomplish. And it also creates an environment of conditional love. So anxiety is starting to fuel itself or starting to get exacerbated by working for love and working for worth. And I say that in air quotes. So you're constantly trying to find your next source of worth and love, and that creates this anxiety because you're scanning for the next opportunity and you're feeling this deprivation when you don't have it. And so these aren't exactly these big events that were like, "Oh, this was traumatic." It's more that the trauma here is the lack of support and the lack of attunement and the lack of inherent worth and love.
Mm. Yes. Like, that emotional attunement is so hard because I think oftentimes as a kid, especially, you don't really recognize or know that you're not getting it, but it really often does come out later in life, and you can see it that, like, oh, maybe there was some stuff, right, that I didn't get that would have been incredibly helpful. So, a part of this, my brain's also going to this place, is can some of the early childhood experiences not be anything like this, like trauma? Maybe this can be considered trauma. I don't know. Like, this will be good to get your thoughts. What if your experience is more so having parents who were highly anxious? Maybe parents who actually struggled with panic disorder or agoraphobia, and that's often what you saw.
Yeah. So that can absolutely be something that results in, well, one, if a parent doesn't have it under control, that can be traumatic for a child to witness, I will say. So that in and of itself can be one of those little T traumas. For some people, that can even be a big T trauma if you do see your parent having panic attacks or if your parent doesn't leave the house. And so you then start internalizing the same threat belief systems that your parent is holding. So in those instances, not only might there be the genetic component in that there is that nervous system sensitivity that is hereditary, there's also the psychological effect of the learnings that you may be inherited from your parent too. So that's just kind of on the growing up in front of anxiety, because again, remember that anxiety is learned and reinforced. But also it might add an additional layer of hypervigilance and fear growing up with a parent who actively demonstrated and struggled with mental illness right in front of you. That's really, really, really hard for children.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. And I think often getting that messaging, right, of like everything's sort of dangerous, and your parents are like, or a parent or caregiver is like overly cautious and like putting a lot of their stuff onto you, right? And so I think I would love for you to hit on this because I know a lot of people listening are parents, and a huge worry is that they're going to like pass their anxiety down onto their kids, and of course, as parents, like none of us want to see our kids struggling. So I just worry if people hear a piece of this conversation, right, or they're listening and they're like, oh my gosh, like I'm causing my child trauma. Like, I don't want anyone necessarily jumping there. So can you hit on that a little bit?
So, one of the most effective ways, well, obviously, is continuing to get your own support. I imagine if you're listening to this, it's because you are open and willing to do the work. So, I really want to highlight that piece to start. But one, it does reiterate that doing the work is really important in order to let you control your anxiety more than let your anxiety control you, which we know is very, very possible. You are not bound forever by the grips of your anxiety. So, just a word of encouragement, please keep doing what you're doing. It's incredibly hard work, but it's so worth it, not only for yourself, but for your family. Two, if you do end up having a panic attack or it is bleeding a little bit more into your family system than you would like, one of the most effective things that you can do with your child is to talk to them about it and explain, this is my thing and this is something that I'm working through. And I want you to know that I'm aware that this is not rational, right? Like, anxiety is not always rational, that I don't want you to think that you can't leave the house. Like, I want to encourage you to keep doing these things. Do not take what I'm doing as fact here, as the way that you should be living your life too. Even just naming that with your child, if they're seeing it, gives them permission to not take it on, because a lot of the times kids wanna please, and so they think, "Well, if my parent is doing this, this must be what's right."
I'm so glad that you said that. Just the piece of talking about it. And I think no matter, obviously, getting some support in this if you feel like you need support and having any of these conversations, but I feel like there's always age appropriate conversations, no matter what age your children are, to actually talk about it and address it. Because I think this is unfortunately often what happens, and probably for a lot of us millennials, is that our parents didn't talk about it. It was like, we don't talk about emotions. We don't go there. Everything's fine. And you really do, as a kid, internalize a lot. And so, if we're actively having these conversations and making sure that our kids understand, like, that does then take the weight off of them, right? And it's such a massive, like, way that you can help them. And obviously, that paired with, like, you're doing the work, like, you're showing them how to have a healthy relationship with their emotions. It's not like you're just struggling and not actively working on things. So I just felt like that was such an important thing to note, because I don't want anyone being like, oh my gosh, I'm screwing my kid up, because I think we worry about that enough.
No, no. There are so like, you don't need to be the perfect parent and you don't need to show up perfectly and, like, you have it all figured out. What is important is to name it rather than allowing your child to internalize it.
Yeah. Oh, so good. Okay. The next one and the last one that we'll talk about, and this is such a big one too, and isn't as heavy, right? But is so important, is this chronic stress without recovery. And this is another really big contributor, and I think is one that's often too very much overlooked. So can we dig into this one?
A big factor that contributes to anxiety is when you are experiencing chronic stress and there is no recovery on the other side. Stress is an inherent part of life. We will not get rid of stress, and stress actually can be really adaptive sometimes. I don't know if you're familiar with the like Yerkes-Dodson law, where you have this optimal stress, this eustress. And without eustress, we actually don't get anything done. So we need stress in our lives. Stress is good. But there does come a point where stress becomes so high that our performance actually drops and we get to this place of burnout. And there are instances, and this typically is a little bit more environmental, where we're in this point of stress where it's leading to more and more of that burnout. We're no longer in that optimal zone. And so when we don't make time for recovery, when we are continuing to go, 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 go without letting ourselves regroup and again, recover, we are exacerbating our anxious response and we are continuing to fuel our nervous system in that fight or flight or burnt out state.
Yeah. Oh, okay. So this is such a big one. And I think I would love for you to talk about, I know I've heard this, and I'm sure there's a lot of truth to this, right? That our bodies can't really distinguish between good and bad stress. Like, stress can just be overwhelming to your system, and it's like can be too much, right? And so I think there are a lot of times we can go through different life events, like having a child or getting married or moving, or like harder things like loss, things like that. But it's like our bodies can't sort of differentiate between, oh, this is good stress or bad stress. And so I think sometimes we can feel like where is this coming from? Like, where is all this anxiety coming from? So, can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so it would be more so the chronic nature of the stress and the intensity of the stress at once that would turn it from, again, this optimal level to this more burnt out place. And when you are experiencing stress again is more to try to get you to mobilize to do something. Stress is like there is an external problem and there is a solution, and we have all of our stress hormones pumping through our body to try to mobilize us. But when we don't see where we can mobilize or it's feeling so overwhelming and we freeze, that's when our stress turns into a little bit more of that anxious response. So it's more a matter of the amount of stress that you're carrying at once rather than your body being like, this is the good stress, this is the bad stress. It's more how is the intensity of it right now? And how many things am I stacking at once, essentially?
Yeah, I was gonna say, so can you give us like a really good example of this that like this is how this sort of can look? Like the having an overwhelming amount of stress. Cause I think there are people listening, right, who are the goers, the doers, the perfectionists that I can take everything on and like
Yes.
it's not a big deal. And you might not even really recognize because I oftentimes I'll have conversations, right, with people and they'll be like, work is fine. Like, sure, it's stressful at times, but it feels like it's a manageable amount of stress. Or like, my relationship's fine. Like, there's not really a whole lot of stress there. And so, but then in talking to people, right, you dig in and it's like, oh my gosh, I'm stressed just listening, right, to everything that you're articulating. So I think that we don't always make the connections of, no, no, there is some stress here.
Yes. So exactly what you're saying. For some people, it's going to be these moments where they're like, I have this stress, but it feels manageable. And then for other people, it's going to feel like maybe something where an example would be I have a really big project at work and I'm getting married in 2 weeks. And I decided to move houses the week after my wedding. And I just have so many of these external things that are requiring my attention, but I'm feeling like there isn't enough time in the day to get this done. So because I feel like I can't anymore, it's the stress initially starts as this I can. And when you hit that burnt out place, it turns into I can't. And that's where you tend to find that overwhelmed state that is no longer in that adaptive, just kind of like going, mobilizing level.
So I mean, obviously this is a big question, but here, what is helpful? Because I think obviously you have to have awareness. And I think sometimes it's so hard to even have the awareness of like, oh, no, I am, like, at a point in which I can't handle all of this, and, obviously, like, the anxiety is coming out either in the racing thoughts or the trouble sleeping or the sensations or symptoms or panic, and you're like, "Oh my gosh, why is this happening?" But it's, like, clear your body's like, "Hey, we need some help, we need some support."
It's exactly what you're saying. It's your body saying, "Hey, I need some help. I need some support. I need something off my plate." So, the way that I typically do approach this tends to be in a more of a practical manner. And let's really assess what needs your imminent attention right now and what are some things that might not need as much attention. When you're feeling this level of stress and anxiety, everything is going to feel like it has a sense of urgency that it might not actually have. So, you do want to take stock of what actually really needs full attention right now versus what can I put a little bit more on the back burner just to give myself more capacity. I do want to also add that when you have this chronic stress, it almost turns into like your body starts expecting that there's going to be chronic stress. And that also fuels this anxiety. So you want to make sure that you are giving yourself a little bit of that recovery, even if it's just an hour to wind down at night, so that your body can essentially reduce its association with constantly being on edge or constantly being in fight or flight. So there's also almost a conditioning to it as well, and it's not gonna feel comfortable to start, especially if you're someone who's so used to being go, go, go all the time. But being go, go, go isn't comfortable either, so it's almost kind of like, let's pick one that might be uncomfortable in the short term, even though it's going to be more beneficial in the long term, rather than continuing with what might feel more comfortable in the short term, but is going to continue to perpetuate this anxiety and this stress in the long term.
Yeah. Oh, I think so much of this recovery piece is like slowing down, which, of course, for lots of people who are struggling with anxiety feels really uncomfortable. But like you're saying, it's like you got to kind of pick the discomfort that's going to actually be helpful because, yeah, you can't keep functioning from this place. Otherwise, your system learns this is just kind of where we need to be. And that is not fun. I mean, we know that if you've experienced it, like constantly being in that fight or flight is so uncomfortable, the most uncomfortable.
And something I often see is that people are so used to being in that stress state that something will get off the plate. Like, okay, the wedding will pass. I'm going to train for a marathon now. And it's like, no, let's learn to be for a second. Again, even though it is really uncomfortable.
It's so true. That's such a good example. Okay, if somebody's listening and they're like, I feel like I like some of this has resonated or like this has been helpful, but they're like, I really want to sort of have more of this understanding and like understand my contributors and like why I'm struggling. How could you sort of maybe encourage them or like point them in a certain direction without people getting stuck in that over analyzing and being in their heads and like just wanting to intellectualize it all?
Yes, great question. So there are a few things. For starters, like I mentioned, take stock of how you are taking care of your body. That is basic kind of like level 1. I have had people come to therapy who really just kind of needed to develop a plan to take care of themselves and their anxiety dramatically reduced. So start there. If you're already there and the anxiety is continuing, then we do want to spend a little bit of time taking stock of what are the beliefs about myself, the world, and others that are contributing to my anxiety. What are some rules that I'm placing on myself? What are my shoulds? And where are these learned from? We do want to know what is getting reactivated when we're experiencing it in the present. So, spend a little bit of time on that without getting bogged down in it because insight is not the same as action. And so, when you do start to notice, okay, I'm having the activation of a thought of I need to take on all of these projects, otherwise I'm not good enough. Then you can really start to challenge that a little bit and say what even is good enough to start and to can I start to really internalize the other ways in which I have this inherent self-worth? And what are the things that I do feel really proud of just in my life now that don't require me to continue striving for these external things that I feel like are going to give me that sense of self-worth? So that's a little bit more on the psychological side of things. Let's strengthen that internal sense of self-worth and reduce the influence of those past experiences that are perpetuating the anxiety. And then on the other front, we do have the starting to train your body to behave a little bit differently, especially because, again, anxiety likes to reinforce itself. Negative emotions like to stick around. Your anxiety might want you to avoid, it might want you to, again, take on 500 projects. It might want you to act like you are being driven by a motor. Let's see what happens if we gradually start doing the opposite of what your anxiety wants you to do. Because that's when we stop letting the anxiety drive the car. It's still going to be in there, and that's okay. The anxiety can be in the car, but you are the one driving, not your anxiety. So, what is it that you value? Is it aligned with your anxiety or is it not? Sometimes anxiety does come up because there is a reason, like there is a threat, there is something that you do need to mobilize on. And that might feel aligned for you. And in that case, by all means, go ahead and be aligned with the anxiety, right? Like anxiety at its core is protective. And when it's not, ask yourself, what do I want right now? What's aligned with me right now? And what can I gradually start doing to essentially loosen the anxious grip? And it's going to be so hard. By all means, it's not to invalidate that. The anxiety will still be there, and that's okay. Because with each baby step, it gets easier and easier and easier. We can't go to the gym for the very first time expecting to lift the 50-pound weights. We have to start with like the 5-pound dumbbells. And that's what we wanna do when we want to start shedding, again, that anxious voice.
Oh, I love that. I think all of that was so helpful. And I think part of it too, do you think I feel like I hear this in one way or another from the people that I work with. is this accountability piece. Like, a lot of times we go to therapy, right? We get the support because we kind of know what to do. We kind of probably even know what's contributing to the anxiety, but we're human. And we so easily want to fall back into like, yeah, this sucks and is uncomfortable, but like at least I know this type of discomfort. So having that accountability piece is oftentimes just what we need to be like, okay, this is what you want to work on. Like, let's do it.
Absolutely, having that external voice also and having like I found that people don't love coming to therapy being like, I I
I
didn't
didn't
do
do
any of
it.
my
Yep.
therapy homework." So it does help to have that external accountability as well.
Yeah.
And I do wanna add for a lot of people, especially the people who do have trauma as the source of their anxiety, sometimes just focusing on the present does not move the needle because you need to work on emotionally processing the impact of the childhood wounds. And if that's the case, I do recommend seeking out a trauma specialized clinician because it's not just the present day anxiety that you're experiencing, it is a recreation of the childhood trauma, and that does require a different approach.
Yeah, I'm so glad you said that because that oftentimes I see that's where people get stuck because you don't have that safety and that trust within yourself. And then you're just trying to push yourself and like, I'm just going to get over the anxiety and do XYZ. And it's like there's so much going on like internally that it doesn't really matter how much you push, right? There's stuff that needs to be processed. So that's pretty good. I love all this very practical stuff because I think so many people get stuck in this like why is it happening and why am I experiencing it? And they'll spend so much time like reading all the books, consuming all the information, like following all the accounts, right? And they're like, I'm going to figure out why. And I think it is such a massive thing to uncover and like do that work. But it's also like, we've got to take some healthy steps, right? We got to like move toward like healing and creating that healthy relationship with anxiety. Debbie, you are wonderful. This has been like amazing, helpful conversation. If people want to find and connect with you, where can they find you?
You can find me on Instagram and TikTok at Therapy Debbie. If you're in New York City or New York State in general and looking for trauma and anxiety specialized care, my practice, Manhattan Psychotherapy Collective, is accepting clients. And that's it. That's where you can find me.
So good. I love it. Thank you again for coming on. I hope you loved this episode of A Healthy Push. If you have, I'd be so grateful if you could leave me a rating and review wherever you're listening to this podcast. This helps people to find the show and get the support they need. And if you know someone who could use a little push, be sure to share this episode with them. And for even more support, head over to ahealthypush.com for show notes and loads of tips, tools, and inspiration to help you on your recovery journey. I'll see you next week.